Hello and welcome back to Giant Talk. I am Roger, I am your host, and I'm very, very pleased to be joined by an extra special guest for Giant Talk today, a gentleman called Behnam Tabrizi. Now, Behnam is a lecturer at Stanford. He's been working at Stanford for over 25 years, specializing in the area of leading organizational transformation. He's an expert in organizational and leadership transformation and has helped thousands of CEOs and leaders plan, mobilize, and implement innovative transformational initiatives. He's no stranger to writing books because he's written 10 of them, and most recently, Going on the Offense, a leader's playbook for perpetual innovation. So, welcome, Behnam.
Thank you for inviting me, Roger. Glad to be here.
No problem. And we're also joined as well by Ilya Satrap, who is Behnam's research assistant. So, welcome to you as well, Ilya.
Thank you, Roger.
No problem. So, Behnam, I'm particularly keen to explore your work and your research. As listeners know, we are a podcast that focuses on OKRs and themes surrounding OKRs. And in our approach, we very much advocate using OKRs to enable innovation and transformation. So, that's very much your wheelhouse. So very, very keen to understand your work, and in particular the thinking that's gone into your latest book, Going on the Offense. But you've worked at Stanford for 25 years, so you obviously had some time elsewhere before that. And I understand you worked in IBM at one point, and you had a bit of a formative experience there that kind of gave you a bit of direction. So would you care to share that with us?
Oh, absolutely. So I studied computer science both as an undergrad and graduate. In graduate school, I studied machine learning. At that time, AI was more algorithmic because we didn't have giant computers as we do today. Mm-hmm. And it was inconceivable to where we are today.
Yeah.
I started working in IBM, and I was applying some of these machine learning thinking and coding to some of their factories. And I had this idea about how we can actually save IBM quite a bit of money in the manufacturing. So I went and talked to my manager. And at that time, I was, I think, 22 years old. And he sat me down and he said, let me just tell you what IBM is. IBM is a big log moving inside on top of a very slow river. And you and I are just a couple of ants, barely floating and barely alive. So what the heck are you trying to do? Go back and do your work.
Yeah.
As you can imagine, Roger, this 22-year-old shrank. And it was an existential moment for me. And it was a defining moment of my life. And, after that, not long after that, I went to Stanford and I did my PhD in strategy, organizations, and technology management. But the point that I've just always been aware of is that, in small companies, people feel large. They feel like they matter. And as organizations grow and grow and grow, people feel like they shrink.
Yes.
And so we need to flip that. And that's been the driving force of my life, writing these books and talking to you today.
I can remember from my own time working in large corporates, I always made it a very big part of my role as a leader to make sure that my people understood just how important their contributions were. Wonderful. And how important their cog in the machine really was, and if their cog wasn't there, the machine wouldn't work. So, yeah, but you're absolutely right. It does become increasingly difficult as the size and scale of the organisation grows. Definitely. So, I mean, in particular, we want to dig into your work, your current work that has led you to publishing Going on the Offence, or shortly, I think, because it's coming out in a week or so. Is that correct?
Yes, it's coming out August 22nd, Going on Offense, a leader's playbook for perpetual innovation, which I'm very excited about since it's a 7-year study I've done with Stanford researchers, former Stanford students, and finally it's coming out.
Fantastic. And my understanding is a large part of your work has focused on AI, and Going on the Offence is about, in your mind, about leveraging innovation. AI presents a massive opportunity for innovation, arguably perhaps the biggest ever. So, in your view, where are we today with AI and organizations?
That's an excellent question. And what I'd like to do is ask my brilliant research assistant, Ilya, to share with you 2 major studies. I mean, these are not just really anecdotal studies. These are major studies that are done with control groups and so forth in terms of where we are with AI. And there are some fascinating results that Ilya is going to share with you. Ilya?
Absolutely, yeah. So first, let's look at a Stanford and MIT call center study from April of this year. The study uses data from over 5,000 customer support agents in software companies who were introduced to a generative AI-based conversational assistant. So they found that access to the tool resulted in an incredible 14% boost in productivity, and they measured productivity by the number of issues resolved per hour. Interestingly, the greatest impact was observed on novice and low-skilled workers, with a minimal impact on those more experienced. And the study kind of concludes that this is because the AI model disseminates the potentially tacit knowledge of more able workers, helping newer workers move down the experience curve quicker. The study also found that AI assistants improved significantly customer sentiment, reduced requests for managerial intervention, and improved employee retention. All groundbreaking findings. And the next study was also done by MIT this time only, very recently, again in March of this year. It examined the productivity effects of a generative artificial intelligence technology, ChatGPT in this case, in the context of mid-level professional writing tasks. In a pre-registered online experiment, they assigned writing tasks to 444 college-educated professionals and randomly exposed half of them to ChatGPT. The results again were staggering, showing that ChatGPT substantially raises average productivity. Not only did the time taken decrease by 0.8 standard deviations, but also the output quality rose by 0.4 standard deviations. Again, it was discovered that inequality between workers decreased as ChatGPT compressed the productivity distribution by benefiting low ability workers more. And this is substantiated by the call center study we just talked about. They concluded that ChatGPT restructures tasks towards idea generation and editing and away from rough drafting. And again, the 3 final conclusions they found was that exposure to ChatGPT increases job satisfaction, increases self-efficacy, and it heightened both concern and excitement about automation technologies. So there's a quick overview about these 2 studies to ground us in the facts before we move on.
Thank you, Ilya. And later, Roger, we'll talk about the problems and the challenges with AI tools and the caveats, but we just want to share with you what these 2 very comprehensive research talk about, just to give a narrative, a real narrative just happened a few months ago that confirms everything Ilya just talked about. Is I was traveling in Asia, and I got a call from a senior executive at one of the largest banks there telling me that, we have created this new wealth product, and our salespeople, our people in the branch and those that are customer facing cannot sell it because there's competition between that and other products, issues with understanding And I basically told him, "Why are you talking to me? I have no clue about how to sell. This is not my wheelhouse." And he said, "Well, I have no one, and I know you will figure it out. So please take care of this for me." And then he just hung up on me. And he's a close friend of mine, by the way. So I went to ChatGPT, Roger, and I wish I could show you the presentation because I showed it to Ilya, and he was just floored. It's like 20 pages of full of information. And I kept playing with it. I asked questions, of course, I prompted it. And then he gave me a rough draft. And I said, well, put it into presentation, put it into slides. So you just go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I looked at some YouTube videos. And lo and behold, I was ready. And I went in there. I told everyone the truth that this is not my area, but I've done enough research to be dangerous.
Yeah.
We had a half a day workshop, and I must say, I'm sure you're the same way. We've done these workshops before, so at least we know how to engage people.
Yeah.
But the topic was definitely out of my wheelhouse, but the results was amazing. The impact that it had in their sales, the type of things that the feedback they gave. And this really emphasizes the fact that if somebody's a novice and is trying to get up to speed to be a mediocre plus type of a thing, and they're careful, of course, I checked some of these things with some of the experts I knew locally in the area just to make sure I'm not really messing this up. At the end of the day, it was amazing. There was no way without ChatGPT I could have gotten in front. And I learned so much about my own business in terms of how can I do better and so forth. So it is a great testament about what's possible.
So there you go, ChatGPT in consultancy.
Exactly.
Okay. So, I mean, those studies present some really interesting data. I mean, there's a lot of positives in that, but I think we all know there's a lot of fear and confusion out there in organizations, particularly in leaders, around how the hell do they make sense of this? Not all organizations are right at the front of this, ahead of the curve. A lot of them are still trying to get their heads around it and work out how to make use of it. So how can we help, or how could you recommend leaders kind of work to embrace this, especially if they're feeling that fear and confusion?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And as you know, I've written 2 articles in Harvard Business Review based on going on offense about the book and this particular question, and just recently published an article in Fortune on Tesla and EV. There's a lot of fear out there, as you mentioned, in terms of people losing their jobs, and there's a lot of anxieties with this new technology. The good news is historically, we've never really experienced macro level unemployment from new technology in the long run. So AI is really unlikely to make people jobless, in the long term. We just got to remember, at least in the US, 60% of current jobs had not been invented in 1940. And more than 85% of employment growth over the last 80 years, more than 85%, explaining the tech-driven creation of occupation. So without tech-driving occupation, we would not have had such a growth globally, if you will.
Yeah.
All these, disruptions displace jobs while creating new ones. However, we all know that with ChatGPT and generative AI, it's moving really rapidly. And, compared to the rise of electricity around the 20th century, it took factories decades to switch from steam power to central drive shafts and to electric motors. But this thing is just at warp speed. So it's very important. It's very, very important that, that organizations really focus on how they could go on offense on this particular innovation. As you mentioned, this is the innovation of perhaps our lifetime, or maybe even in history. there was this thing where made a lot of noise where they said software is going to eat the world. We believe AI is going to eat the world. We also believe we're in the early stages, a lot to be determined. And it's important that organizations could understand and embrace it, if you will. The AI, different organizations are adopting and integrating differently right now in AI. Goldman Sachs, predicted that companies would use it to eliminate a quarter of all their current work tasks. So there's a lot of fear about losing jobs, and the whole story and the whole point that I like to really emphasize is that if your organization goes on offense and apply this in a manner, you can actually increase productivity, you can serve more, you don't have to get into this need for completely letting people go. And as you know, there are lots of problems with these, we'll talk about this, with these tools. And a lot of organizations who laid off massively, now they realize that they can rely on these things to basically do all the work and so forth. So the point is innovation. We really need to make sure that we're aggressive about this. That through innovation with AI, we create new jobs, and macroeconomically speaking, this is good for the economy, this is good for organizations, and it's important that these organizations position themselves to thrive in the long run.
Yeah, I think if I was a change manager, head of transformation in an organization, perhaps, I think I would be think regarding this as my biggest challenge from an organizational perspective, from a mindset perspective, from a motivational perspective, from a human perspective, because there is so much out there that's in the news on a daily basis around AI, and some of it is not so much relevant to the current tools that are available publicly. A lot of the fear, I think, is coming from the tools that are still in the laboratory that are not available for us to use yet. And it'll be interesting to see how things progress in that respect, because there's obviously talk around regulation and or possible regulation. But anyway, with what we have available to us here and now, how can organizations start to leverage AI to gain a competitive advantage?
The most important first step that organizations need to do, if they're committed to apply this to gain a competitive advantage, is what I call an operating principle. And the leadership, this is not something the CEO or the senior executives should delegate to further down the line and so forth. They need to be engaged. They need to bring their smartest people who know about AI. They need to work with outsiders who are expert in this area for the organization to come up with operating principles that fits their need. And some of the things that I like to propose is, for example, the organization need to decide what kind of data sets are employees allowed to plug in third-party LLMs. For example, if you are a doctor, you shouldn't put patients' data in ChatGPT. No. But even organizations, they are very adamant about particular data being on ChatGPT and being available for public. So this is a big issue, and there has to be boundaries there. There's a lot of movement right now about creating in-house LLMs to avoid these issues, and so it's very important that organizations create these boundaries and be clear about the data policy. Second, organizations should also employees should be made aware of any biases rooted in these AI models. We all have heard these terrible, terrible biases that is happening, the hallucination and incorrect information. My colleague, Ricardo Vargas, talks about the 5% and 85%, and that is you get involved in the first 5% of prompting, and then the last 85% you get involved as Ilya just mentioned, you talk about the writing part, but as we all know, someone who's doing a lot of writing, the first draft is usually the hardest thing. ChatGPT does your first draft, but really you get involved in the last 15%. I would even add to 5 to 85% that you need a lot of milestones in between where you check, you re-enter, as I did when I was in Southeast Asia for my presentation. So people need to be made aware of these biases and issues and so forth. So that's the second one. Third one, employees and organization as a whole should really have that experimental approach to AI. And as you know, innovation is all about experiment. It's a very deliberate experimentation. And it's because we're early on in the evolution and we want to remain in cutting edge. We've got to make sure that there's a basic level of knowledge across the entire organization. There are lots of great courses in Udemy, there is a Coursera, there's Stanford, MIT, there are lots. Google has a lot of great AI courses. I suggest people take these base level courses. Organizations need to get their people up to speed in these type of courses. And then, gotta get your people to say, hey, try one tool a week, experiment with them. And then also create a committee, which I call the pioneers, AI pioneers, where they would basically be a mixture of senior executives and people in frontline and other AI people, either experts or those who really want to get up to expertise very quickly, where they try things and they look at these operating principles and constantly improve it. They also need to look at AI not just as a cutting cost, which I believe is a defensive move, but finding new verticals, finding new growth areas, finding new businesses. And finally, I think a very critical part of this should also be reskilling. AI does help with a lot of non-value added activities, a lot of automation, a lot of things that could be non-value added. And people could be reskills to do something more upstream and so forth. So there has to be a deliberate way to do this. Having said that, I want to now talk about how the findings of the book and the research of the book could help, because as you mentioned earlier, the book is about innovation. It's about perpetual innovators. These organizations are not one-time innovators where they go away. They've just like nonstop innovators. And the four companies that came out really ahead in our work. And by the way, BCG also did a survey recently. These are my work and their work was independent, and all their four showed up in their top five. These are companies such as Apple, two CEOs, and they're still pretty much running in all cylinders. Tesla, it's basically, as I wrote in the recent Fortune magazine, they're becoming a standard for EVs and EV chargers. Amazon, which is a fascinating organization, starting as retail and then moving on into cloud and Alexa and so forth. So that's another organization. By the way, 1.3 million people work in Amazon. So how do you
and they've seriously disrupted some very traditional, stable marketplaces, haven't they? Already,
they have. And this book, in this research, we went into depth, talked to dozens of people who are former executives, current executives. We studied the things that are written about Amazon, and then the other one is Microsoft, which I think is an amazing story of an organization that. Usually organizations that have been really, really great, let's say 20, 30, 40 years ago, they don't really do well. They kind of go away. But Microsoft, thanks to their CEO, Satya Nadella, they have reconnected to their soul and they've had a great, great comeback. So those are some of the organizations that we talk about. We looked at 26 companies, so we don't have survival chip bias. We also looked at failing companies such as Borders and Nokia and others. and we divided these teams into these organizations to high, medium, and low agility and innovation. And we also had the surveys of over 6,000 people with academics, executives, to just make sure that this survey and this work is well researched. And the point I want to make is evidence based. I wanted to come up with evidence based. There's a lot of great work my colleagues do, which they study one company and go into depth. I was more interested in looking at a set of successful companies because there's no one size fit all. And my dream, Roger, was for organization to decide. There's no way like you can become a Tesla, and 95% organizations are not like these four. So the question is, how could I be 10% better, and which areas I can learn from Apple, which areas I can learn from Microsoft, and what have you. So for me, that is just a fascinating challenge that I worked on with these type of organizations. So basically, in a nutshell, the key results is found out 8 drivers of agile innovation, of perpetual innovation, from existential purpose to obsession with customers, to startup mindset, radical collaboration, high tempo, bimodality. So we talk about these 8 points, and we talk about also 3 archetypes about what is a successful innovation and perpetual innovation. And these organizations are very ferocious and they're very courageous, if you will. First, I'd like to talk to you about one of my favorite, which is really the second chapter of the book, which is really about existential purpose. And I'll talk about AI in this context. Existential purpose inspires people to do the hard work of transforming an organizations. When Satya Nadella became a CEO in 2014, he wanted to connect to the soul of Microsoft. Earlier, I've written a book called Inside Out, which is about how do you bring the best version of every leader out. He really had the entire organization go through this inside out type of a connection with the outside in terms of where Microsoft was going, had amazing, authentic conversation to bring everybody along. And then he did this very bold, courageous move of getting out of the Nokia business, which they just had spent so much money. And then he looked at AI. He wanted to be AI first company. And then he went to a series of acquisition. And there's a concept that I've talked about in a HBR article that I wrote, acquisition transformation. So through a lot of buying these organizations, including OpenAI, it even helped Microsoft accelerate its transformation.
Well, their head of technology came from LinkedIn, from the LinkedIn acquisition.
Exactly. LinkedIn acquisition also has been very good. So basically, he has made a massive cultural change, and the whole point. I mean, this is the nugget I want to really underline, is that in order to adopt AI, in order to use AI as a competitive advantage, you need to transform your culture. You can't just drop AI and parachute it down to your organization and think that, we're an AI organization, which a lot of organizations now are unfortunately paying lip service. You got to do it hand in hand. Transform your organization, adopt AI at the same time. So if you want to adopt innovation, you also get to unleash the power of every individual in your organization. And I'll talk more in detail, but this whole open AI, and as you know, sometimes late last year when Microsoft came and presented this, it basically took Google's thunder. And I love to juxtapose these two. I did it in an earlier article in HBR in February, and I basically said, these two organizations are great to compare because at some point Google had 70% of all the AI talent, including when they bought all the top AI talent, including DeepMind, where they bought. But at the same time, they got completely, taken over by Microsoft. Now, in my view, Google, I would never, write Google off. I believe they have an amazing talent. They can still turn around, but they got their work cut out because they need to really go through some of the things that we talk about here.
Yeah.
Second, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say with Google, I mean, I don't know whether this is the correct interpretation, but it seems almost like they became so reliant upon search as being their cash cow that anything else that could potentially distract or diminish that in any way seemed to be, maybe they became more conservative and more cautious than perhaps they like to think they were.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a combination of they were making so much money out of that, and there was such a cash cow. And it is definitely being cautious and not being bold enough. And by the way, I have a chapter on courageous and how courageous organizations that are perpetually innovative are. So they were not courageous; they were more incremental type of changes, and there was also a lot written recently with their former employees how toxic the culture became in the past few years, where people would go make a lot of money and were not really bring their best out and so forth. So it's a combination of these that led to this issue. Nevertheless, because they have the talent, at the end of the day, they could turn this around. One of the reasons I really like going on offense, because we talked about this earlier. Just like you, I love soccer and what you guys call football if you only play defense, it's not enough. And the whole book is about sometimes you just got to go on offense.
Yeah,
and it's got a lot of energy and excitement to it. And AI is definitely a place to go on offense. But to go on offense, you also need to be bold. You need to also take some risks. And the next point is really a startup mentality. It is important, and this is what Microsoft did well. And this is such an important thing with AI, because Microsoft, when embraced OpenAI, they adopted it. They wanted to be an AI first company. They pivoted very quickly. They're currently also buying other AI organization. So it's not just about courage and flexibility. Startup mindset it really is about ferocious commitment to big achievement. A hero's journey to address great challenges, if you will. And instead of just predictably churning out good product, it's about create something extraordinary. So the premium of looking around, flexible partnership with others, is the type of things that they've done in Microsoft. And Amazon does that. Amazon is also very ferocious. It's 1.3 million organization that oftentimes act like a startup.
Yeah.
They had no expertise in AI, but they picked it up, and the Echo Speaker and Alexa are some of their thing. And just the other day, they came up with a killer quarterly report, which I just wrote a piece on it, and I'm hoping to publish it this week or next week, giving a lot of credit to Andy Jassy. And and his talk was, we're just going to adopt AI all over Amazon, and it's part of every product. So again, they're going on offense with AI. The next one, which I'm also very, very excited.
Just before you do, the thing that really struck me about the entrepreneurial mindset, which Satya did at Microsoft, was that he cleared the way. He seemed to remove barriers, some might say bureaucracy, particularly for the engineers, because he knew that was where the innovation perhaps was going to be fueled. That's where it was really going to come from. And from what I understood, he seemed to clear the way and make it easier for them to just crack on.
Absolutely. And in the book and in the article, we talk about the fact that he raised the status of engineers. And he took away the friction that they were facing. And this is part of the unleashing talent that I'm a big believer that unless you unleash talent, And there's there in every chapter we have examples of like Microsoft, in this area, what did Amazon, in the area of bold or startup mentality, what is it that Tesla did, and what is it that companies that didn't succeed like Borders and others did, that what led to their failures. So this whole thing about friction, and my colleagues here at Stanford, Bob Sutton and Huggy Rao, they're writing a book on friction that's coming out next year that talks about how organizations just create these frictions. And how it's anathema to unleashing talents and so forth. So one last thing that I want to also talk about, characteristics I want to talk about is bimodal operation. And bimodal it's really about being ambidextrous. And I'm going to ask Ilya to help me out on this, but it's one of my favorite one. It's also based on the doctoral thesis I did in '94 at Stanford, which talked about the fact that if you do iterative prototyping, you can actually get to market quicker, which was the foundation of design thinking and agile development. So there are some really interesting things that, about bimodal approach that is fascinating. For example, earlier in my career, I also worked with Intel after I finished Stanford PhD. I worked with Andy Grove. And they were amazing in terms of execution. But in area of, for example, imagination, in area of experimentation, like the way Bezos has done it or Apple has done it, they were not as good. And that became their Achilles heel. So, Ilya, why don't you talk about the bimodal approach and why this is so critical in both AI and also going on offense?
Yeah, so as we know, most big companies inevitably lapse into an incremental mode of progress, where managers and teams focus on ironing out kinks, putting out fires, and making small improvements to an already successful product or service. But this is terrible for AI, which requires a completely different mode, an open mind with lots of fundamental experiments. The obvious solution is to go bimodal, as Behnam has touched on. One part of the organization scales up, supports and tweaks the existing offerings, while another explores the frontiers with new offerings, technologies, methods, and structures. However, it's remarkably hard to be ambidextrous because the dominant incremental mode keeps pushing the experimental mode to accept its disciplines. Solutions such as entrepreneurship rarely work unless overseen by a gifted leader who manages this political conflict. Bimodal is going to be especially crucial for AI. Not only will companies need to keep the lights on and revenue flowing while they experiment with AI, but they'll also have to iron out the kinks in whatever advances they make. And soon enough, they'll need to run bimodal even for AI itself. But for now, a bimodal approach that Behnam touched on earlier, organizations and their HR departments can focus on upskilling their workforce with AI proficiency courses run by the likes of Coursera, Google, Stanford, etc., to provide a baseline of understanding within an organization. And simultaneously, organizations should put together a group of experts, what Behnam calls the AI pioneers, to brainstorm, experiment, and constantly search for new ways to really change the game with AI.
In order to kind of conclude, Roger, all of this amazing conversation we've had, but let me also, I know you and I talked about OKR, because OKR, I think, is very critical to innovation, and I'd like to add a little bit to that. When you have an ambidextrous organization, first of all, it's not easy. Because the way you like, for example, let me just talk about Amazon for a second. I studied the fulfillment centers Amazon, and talking about OKR. My goodness, Roger, you're gonna love this story. My nephew, which I talk about in this book, he had right out of school, he had like several hundred people working for him in fulfillment center. He had a tough time getting a job. So they told him a night shift in Amazon. He embraced it, and then he did well. He did really well there, working with blue collar workers, and he had to, adjust to this environment. And boy, I've seen him unleash his talent. So basically, we were interviewing him, and he was talking about how for example, let me just share with you some things. For example, if let's say a package is late, they would FedEx it to you so you get it on time. They incur costs because they're so obsessed about customer. They watch these OKRs, and then, I ask him, what if like one of your employees is not meeting their OKRs? How do you manage it? And then he's like, well, we address it on a quarterly basis. We give feedback. And I said, wow, that's great, Cyrus. Quarterly basis, that's nice. That's what most organizations do. He said, no, you don't understand. I'm talking about every 2 hours. Order OKR for Amazon is every 2 hours.
Yeah.
Now, if you go to a lab where they come up with the latest experiments on cloud or Alexa, or the way the Firefly was put together, and follow up Alexas and so forth, what you find is that it's very different. Those OKRs are much more iterative.
Oh, absolutely.
Are more milestone oriented. For example, they say we have no clue.
They don't have data at that point to make it to make a metric, to base a metric on. Yeah.
So they know, like, for example, in the next 2 weeks, what we're going to do, what we're going to test, what we're going to find. And once they get that, then maybe they know they have more visibility 4 weeks down the line, 6 weeks down the line. So they're not as, focused per se, but they're very good with drawing the line in the sand in terms of, okay, you have 2 or 3 months to do simulation. Let's see the results. And they constantly change course in a startup mode and pivot. And by the way, that's what Silicon Valley is. Silicon Valley. It's because of how organizations just iterate their way to innovation.
Sure.
They pivot and so forth. So it is a completely different way. So if you get a manager who runs this fulfillment center and have them run one of these labs, they'll just completely ruin the lab, and vice versa. So this is where I think Intel Achilles heel was they were amazing in those type of fulfillment center. And by the way, Amazon picked up a lot of those execution techniques, disagree and commit, a lot of cultural elements from Intel, but they also mastered that other completely different organization processes model.
Yeah, and this is something which we work on with our clients, and we've seen it in many organizations where there's a challenge to kind of manage the two different speeds, if you will, that those two different environments, two different challenges, two different areas present. You've got the fast-moving operational side of the enterprise, but then you also need to have that the where's the next big thing, where's the transformation, where's the innovation, where's the growth coming from, and they work at different clock speeds.
Exactly.
Yeah. So very much so.
Just to summarize, our great conversation, companies can adopt these drivers overnight, but they can start moving toward it and have serious commitment. One thing I also want to share with your readers, these drivers like startup mentality, being bold, bimodal, also work really well for the level of individuals. In fact, I've sent a piece to Wall Street Journal where it basically talks about how these 8 characteristics actually fits with individuals in terms of their own career, whether they're executives or frontline manager, frontline employee. How could they actually be bolder, have that startup mentality, bimodal thinking? So those are also critical at that individual level, if you will. Bottom line, humanity never thrives when it fears innovation, and as Tim Cook mentioned when he talks about Steve Jobs. Hey, why don't I just play Tim Cook talking about Steve Jobs, because I think it's a great ending to this great interview. Let me just share with you a conversation Tim Cook just recently had on Steve Jobs.
The thing that Steve taught me was that the joy is in the journey. And, I used to always think about the next thing and always sort of put off the happiness until the next thing occurred. And of course, the next thing never occurred. But he taught me the joy was in the journey. And so when I talk to kids these days and people beyond kids, I remind them of that. Because I think if you live your life that the joy is in the journey, you're going to have a lot happier life.
So the joy of going on offense is in the journey, Roger. And I appreciate for the time you had and enjoyed this conversation.
Behnam, Ilya, I hugely enjoyed it as well. Thank you very, very much. I'm sure our listeners will have as well. I think if there's one thing practically, which I personally am taking away from this, it is to ensure that all my team are going on AI training very soon.
If I may add one more,
sure.
Try 1-2 every week, and play with it, and because some of them are probably using it, and this is what I tell a lot of executives. You can't just forbid people from using. Some of them are using it, but also let them know about this 85% rule. That look, if you use it, really check and check and check. Yeah.
I've played with GPT myself so far, but it's only been a play. I haven't used it in anger, so to speak. But I'm sure there's a lot more that we can personally be doing with it. That's for sure. Behnam, huge thanks. Very appreciative of your time, and thank you very much for listening. And I look forward to you joining me on another episode of Giant Talk in the very near future. Take care now.
Thank you, Roger. Bye-bye.